It is book review Sunday, and I have two books to review today. The first one is by my favorite alien romance author, Nancy Cummings. This book is called Alien Warlord's Miracle. And so she has her main series, and then she has her spin-off series. Her main series are connected. All of the male main characters on the same are in the same clan and are on the same battleship. And some of the female main characters are connected. There are two sets of sisters. And then she has her spin-off series, which takes place in the same universe, and sometimes they're connected to the main clan, and sometimes they are not. And so Alien Warlord's Miracle is part of the spin-off series and is an entire generation into the future. So I give Alien Warlord's Miracle 4 stars. I'm going to do my first two bullet points together because they interconnect. So this is an alien romance. This is Nancy Cummings after all. And this is also a time travel romance. And what happens is that the main male character, Revan, is doing an experimental flight with an older medical ship, and he gets attacked by the Sulik, and one of the buttons he presses to kind of quickly zoom away ends up putting him in a time traveling wormhole, and he ends up crashing onto the moors of England in the late 1800s. Now, to go with my second bullet point, with this being the kids' futures of the original Mahdfel. So Revan in the original series is a child. He doesn't live on the battleship. He lives on his mother's planet, Sangren. And he goes to a Mahdfel private school called the Academy, and he meets a human boy named Michael, and they become best friends at the Academy. Michael is connected to our main female character in another story. She is his mom, and they end up visiting Sangren for the holidays, and she meets her fated alien mate, and they end up staying on the planet. So we don't get a huge chunk of time with Revan when he's a kid, only a couple of chapters, and he's kind of a troublemaker and a little punk. So it's fun to see him all grown up and serious and at least attempting to be responsible. And we know that it's quite a bit into the future because Michael, really one of the few human males in the series, is in his 40s, and he has a wife and children. So it was fun to at least get those two children who are now grown men get a little sneak peek of what their future ended up being. And I hope that Nancy Cummings chooses to write spin-off series for all of the Mahdfel babies that we've met over the 10 plus books that she has written. So the final thing that I really liked about this is that the type of romance it is a slow burn, which means that it takes time for the male main character and the female main character to fall in love, to maybe trust each other, and especially the physical aspects of their romance and their relationship. So, and part of it is one, that it makes sense for time travel, this specific time travel, for it to be that way, because Revan is literally an alien that has crash landed on Earth in the late 1800s. And the female character, Elizabeth, her farm is where he crashes. And she's a widow and has been for 2 years. And around the time that he crashes on her farm, she is finally ready to take off her black mourning clothing and wear colors again, which would then tell society that she is ready to be courted by single men once again. And so Revan, and I'm going to go back to that so you can kind of see what he looks like here. The way that these aliens that Nancy Cummings has created, they have purple or magenta skin, and they have a human physique. They do share that, but then they have these horns that grow out of their heads at the top. So kind of imagine someone like him showing up in England in the late 19th century, and no one is going to think alien. They're going to think the devil, which is exactly what happens. He's called the demon of the Moors, and so everyone is scared of him, and once he realizes that he's not in modern day Earth, he knows he needs to hide from the residents of the village that is nearby. And so Elizabeth does end up coming across him, and when she is not scared of him, he ends up being honest with her on who he is and what has happened, and that he's trying to get back to his own time. Now, Revan has a problem that he has not brought up with Elizabeth, and he can tell that she is his fated mate. And he does not know how to properly handle that because he is slowly falling in love with her, but she belongs in the past and he belongs in the future. And Elizabeth is, even though she has decided to come out of mourning, she still misses her deceased husband. He was the love of her life, but she is starting to fall for Revan. And so the buildup of their chemistry, not only their mental romance, but their physical romance is slow, and it's really great. And with that, on that topic of slow burn versus other timelines for first kisses and even into intimacy, something that Nancy Cummings does that I would really like to compliment her on is she's written at least 15 books within the Mahdfel universe at this point, and all of them follow a different schedule, for lack of a better word, when it comes to the couple having their first kiss, having their first I love yous, finally being intimate with each other. There are books of hers where the characters get to it right away. We're on the 4th chapter and they're already ready to be intimate. Others fall more within the middle of the book, and then others, like Revan's and Elizabeth's story, aren't until the very final chapter. And I like that. I like that when I open up one of her books, I don't know what I'm going to get when it comes to the chemistry and the intimacy. It's nice to know that I am going to go on the same roller coaster ride as the characters. There is one thing that I would have loved to be better explained. And when Elizabeth asks Revan to take her back to his time with him, he says, I can't. I could mess things up. He keeps calling it the paradox. I will create a paradox by interacting with you. If I stay in your time, or if you come with me, we're going to mess things up. And at first it's like, well, yeah, he might be right. But here's the thing. He saves Elizabeth's life twice. And if he hadn't been there to save her life, so she did die in his original timeline before he goes back in time. And so it's pretty obvious, at least on my end as the reader, that he's meant to take her back to his time. She dies in the original timeline, so it's okay for him to take her off of Earth. He's not going to ruin a future family by doing that. And so when he doesn't, and that's never figured out by them. And I just found that kind of frustrating because I felt like they should have been smart enough to figure it out eventually. Or to have him go back. Now, this would create a longer book, which I would love. Or to have him do make it back to his own time without her, and then have the fact that he didn't bring her with him messed up the original Earth timeline. Either way, I just would have liked that, since it was something that was a hindrance for their relationship. I would have liked it to have been more finalized or figured out or explained by the end of the book. But at the same time, I will argue against myself and say that maybe Nancy Cummings didn't need to spell it out. Maybe she planned for the reader to figure it out without the characters needing to have a conversation about it. So either way, it was still a really great story. And the heat level for this one is sensual. Second book, The Blood of Faeries by Dan Rice. This is the second book in the Allison Lee Chronicles. I reviewed the first one, Dragons Walk Among Us, a few weeks ago. I give The Blood of Faeries 4 stars. First thing I liked is that Allison, our main character, is known throughout the human world. This is something that, while it does happen, it's not the most common plot to create. Usually when we have our character that has supernatural abilities, they keep that part of them a secret. But at the very end of Dragons Walk Among Us, Allison rips a car door off of its hinges to save her friend and turns into her shifter form of a skag in front of dozens of people who have their cell phones out and are recording. So everyone knows who she is and they know what her abilities are. And so in the second book, she is navigating, attempting to return to a normal life in Seattle, Washington, and go to high school with everyone knowing that she can turn into a monster. The second thing that I enjoyed is that we get to dive deeper into how magic works in this world. So this is a sci-fi fantasy series. There are fantastical elements with the dragons and the skags, and there are wizards or magicians, I think that's what they're called. Sorry, they're called magicians in this series, in this world. But then there's also a lot of science fiction with technology. Allison's prosthetic eyes that seem to be a mixture of magic and high tech. And then this one, the second one, really dives into more sci-fi aspects as we go into deep, farther along the plot line. There's kind of a couple different mad scientist characters that are going to be the villains that Allison needs to fight her way through. But back to the magic, I kind of went on a tangent. In the first book, we do meet one magician, and dragons do have their own magic as well. But specifically when it comes to humans wielding magic, the first book explains that magicians have to inject themselves with heroin in order to feel and use their magic. And the second book further explains that not just anyone who shoots up heroin can have access to magic. You already have to have some innate ability to tap into it. The magic has to already exist within you. At least that's how I understood it. And the heroin just simply helps you bring it out. And we also learn that heroin isn't the only substance that can help you bring your magic out. So there are some other substances that these mad scientists are creating and mass producing so that they can help more magicians become more powerful. And then the last thing I enjoyed is that a new species is introduced, and I'm sure you can guess what that species is based on the book title. We have fairies coming into play. And I have to compliment Dan on his creation of fairies. And it's something I've noticed in other fantasy series as well, is that a lot of writers are going beyond the Tinkerbell version of fairies. And I thought that Dan's version of fairies were fantastic. They're not these tiny little happy things. There is fairy dust, but it's a lot more menacing than what Tinkerbell does. And they're great. I am really looking forward to more fairies in the third book whenever it releases, which I do know that Dan has signed his contract with his publisher for the third book, and so hopefully it will be out next year. The only thing I wish was different was that the fairies came into the story earlier, especially since they're kind of the titular aspect of this second book. We're well beyond the 50% mark by the time Allison meets her first fairy. And I will say that the first book was kind of similar when it came to the dragons. It took a while to meet them and get the ball rolling with what dragons are doing on Earth and how they fit into human society and all that. But I gave the first book grace because it's the first book of a larger series. And I do acknowledge that when it comes to larger fantasy series, the first book, it does need to have some extended time on world building and introducing us to the characters. So that was fine. But since fairies are mentioned in the first one, I think they could have come into play much earlier in the second book, because it wasn't like oh, here's this other creature that also exists. They're mentioned in the first book, and so we could have met them much, much earlier. And I personally would have preferred that, because out of all the different species in this world, the fairies so far are my favorite, and I want to get to know them more. But I still enjoyed it, and I'm still looking forward to the third book. If you like aliens, or at least want to give them a try, check out Nancy Cummings. And if you like dragons and fairies and science fiction, check out The Blood of Fairies. And I will see you next Sunday. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button so that you can be the first to know of new episodes.